I'd like to introduce Sarah Phillimore. Now, Sarah Phillimore, thank you so much for coming. Sarah is a family law barrister and she's a member of Fair Cop. She's suing Eventbrite for unlawful discrimination after they refused to allow her book launch on their site, claiming that she had breached their community standards with regard to violent extremism. So thank you so much, Sarah, for coming on and talking to us and sharing what you found out and how you're campaigning and what you're doing about it. So over to you.
My job, since I found out what was happening in about 2018, which is shockingly late, I know, is to simply campaign as hard as I can for the right for all women to say that sex is real and it matters, and that biological sex ought to be protected in law. So whether that's a feminist stance or not, that is my stance. So what I'm going to do is give you a run through about what happened with Eventbrite and what I hope is going to happen. So if what I say today is interesting to you and you want to know more, then don't worry about taking notes or anything. Just check out my Substack. I think if you just Google Sarah Phillimore Substack, it'll come up. So for those of you who aren't aware what happened to me, I, together with Al Peters, started gathering women and men's stories about 2 years ago. We asked, how did you find yourself in the gender wars? What's your peak trans story? And we got a really lovely collection of stories. I mean, some really harrowing, some humorous. We put them together in a self-published book, which Al Peters is a very talented graphic designer. He made it look lovely, and we're selling it on Amazon if you're interested. I thought what would be nice is to have a book launch for our book. So I got the Conway Hall for the 2nd of December, and I put a link to it on Twitter, and nobody noticed, and we sold about 10 tickets. I then made the mistake of announcing the speakers, who included Graham Linehan, Helen Standerland, and Maria McLachlan. That got the attention of various activists on Twitter, and all it took was one tweet to say, "Oi, Eventbrite, do you really want to be hosting this event?" So Eventbrite then, on the 27th of October, sent me the following email. "We are reaching out regarding your event listing, launch of transpositions, personal journeys into gender criticism. We have determined that your event is not permitted on the Eventbrite platform, as it violates our community guidelines and terms of service, specifically our policy on hateful, capital H, dangerous, capital D, or violent content and events. As a result, your event has been unpublished. Please be aware that severe or repeated violations of our guidelines may result in the suspension or termination of your Eventbrite account. Please reply directly to this email if you have any further questions." Well, I had quite a lot of further questions, and I sent many emails, which were all ignored. Happily, the Daily Telegraph, the Daily Mail, the Critic thought this was an interesting story, and I was asked to write an article for the Critic and then for Spiked. It seemed that one of their legal counsel, based in California, saw that article in the Critic and emailed me asking if we could have a chat over Zoom. I said, yes, please. I'm really disturbed with what you've done. There's nothing dangerous, hateful, or violent about this event at all. And you're effectively smearing me, all the speakers, and all those attending as hateful, violent bigots. So we had a chat. It was a masterclass in attempted psychological manipulation. I was told how knowledgeable I was, how intelligent I was, how deep my knowledge of these issues ran, and they had so much to learn from me. I said, that's nice. I asked if I could see the contents of the complaints that had been made against me. No, they weren't going to do that. They would have an internal review and they would let me know if they would reverse their decision. So I said, well, that's very kind of you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And I waited to hear. And of course, the decision was, without any further explanation, context or detail, that no, the event was not going to be reinstated. What I found most chilling and interesting about that conversation was that the reason given for the pulling of the plug was a duty of care Eventbrite claimed to owe people attending my event. I was told there was a real risk that violent men would turn up and hurt somebody. Therefore, Eventbrite had a duty not to promote that, to keep everybody safe. I mean, if that actually was genuine, which I doubt, that's utterly appalling, because that is giving these men the very clear message that your campaign of violence and intimidation against women is working, and we will, rather than stand up to you, shut these women down. So that was really worrying. So I was definitely convinced I was going to take legal action against them. So I managed to get a solicitor. That was a pretty hard job. Nobody wanted to touch it. I was eventually very lucky to get the same solicitor who acted for Sonia Appleby in her action against the Tavistock. Now, his plan, which was very sensible as it turned out, was not to launch straight in with a letter before action, but to make a data subject access request on my behalf of Eventbrite. And I got some of those key documents early this year, and I included some of the more interesting comments, again, in a Substack post. So if you're interested, do Google that and check it out. It is very illuminating about how these companies think. What was really quite disturbing to me was just how much investigation they then went into about me once it was clear I was serious. And they're very excited to discover that Wiltshire Police had 12 pages of my tweets under the heading "A Barrister Posting Hate." Sadly, in their excitement, they forgot to do their research about what happened next when Wiltshire had to concede they'd acted unlawfully and paid my solicitors £12,000. But there we go. There's suddenly a great flurry of interest in me, calling me a Nazi and an anti-Semite. So we've now got a letter before action that went. And the action we're proposing against Eventbrite is based on two key issues. The first is under the Equality Act, because Section 29 of the Equality Act provides a service provider must not discriminate against a person, B, requiring the service, by not providing that person with the service, by termination of the provision of the service, or by subjecting B to any other detriment such as harassment and victimization. So that's issue number one. And of course, for that, we're relying on Forstarter, Miller, and also the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association against the Scottish Event Campus Limited, which was a case very recently, where the venue had to pay out a considerable sum of money for cancelling a meeting of evangelical Christians who had committed to the view that homosexuality was a sin. Now, that may well be extremely offensive to many, but it's a view they're entitled to hold, as the Scottish Event Campus found out. Also, my solicitors are arguing for breach of contract on the basis that paragraph 27.2 of the Eventbrite Terms of Service allows a party to refuse to accept to be bound by the law of the state of Delaware in the United States. That's where Eventbrite says anything against them must be litigated. And I think they insist on arbitration. We're saying we've opted out of that, and the law governing this contract is English law. We're therefore going to argue that any definition of fear, hate, or prejudice that you applied to my book launch was so broad as to be entirely meaningless, thus making the contract void for uncertainty. Now, what's really interesting is Eventbrite replied and said, well, we don't accept we're bound by English law at all. Well, okay, fair enough. You'd think that might be the end of it. But no, they've asked until the 24th of February to undertake a detailed reply so that I can understand their position about this very complex issue. Now, I think that's really interesting because that to me suggests they don't have much faith in their argument that they're not bound by English law. And also, I don't think it is complex at all. What's happened here is that a foreign multinational country has imposed its own community standards on a UK citizen in defiance of UK domestic laws. There is a clear breach of the Equality Act here, that my event was removed because it promoted violent or hateful content. It didn't. It was about people discussing their protected belief that sex is real and it matters. And also remember that Eventbrite include in its definition of hate disparagement, which is incredibly broad and subjective. I'm sure I disparage people every waking moment of my life, and I'm unaware I'm doing it because they subjectively have taken offence at something I've said. So I think I've got a strong case, and I think it's something that really needs flushing out. So, why is this important? You might say, well, come on, Sarah, your book launch went ahead, it sold out. What was the problem? You just had to carry around a bit of cash in a Tupperware box because you couldn't get the money dealt with online. Yeah, that's true. On that perspective, nothing really major happened. My event went ahead. It was a great night. We sold loads of books. Everyone had a good time. But it's the wider perspective which is really concerning. Platforms such as Eventbrite claim to be operating to the public good. They relied on breach of their own community standards to remove my event. However, Eventbrite is creating and enforcing these standards with no public consultation and no public scrutiny. The boundaries between laws created by our parliament and efforts to impose a private organisation's own moral code on the wider public is becoming hopelessly blurred. And this has serious implications for the health of our actual democracy. I'm not being alarmist here. We elect politicians who pass laws with a supposed democratic mandate. If a private company can just slide in and undercut those laws whenever it feels like, then that is an end to democracy. I also think my case shows the dangers of political purity. And we've had a rather unpleasant example of that on Twitter, I think yesterday, where I saw Maya Forstater being criticised for not being 100% compliant with the views of certain women who donated money to her. They felt that they were owed something because they'd given her money. I was very disappointed to see that, because really, without Maya's judgment, I wonder whether we would actually be able to gather here and now and speak in this way. Remember that we had the state telling us that we were not worthy of respect in a democratic society, that we were on a par with the Nazis. So I think we all owe Maya Forstater an incredible debt of gratitude. And if you donated £20 to her crowdfunder, then you got a very good deal. Our fundamental freedoms secured for a small amount of money. But remember, Eventbrite also did this to, I think, 3 events organised by Women's Place UK. There was a book launch for Karen Ingala Smith, and there was a showing of the adult human female documentary. And Women's Place UK issued a statement at the time saying they're a grassroots feminist organisation and they wouldn't be contemplating legal action. Now, that's absolutely fair enough. I fully understand the emotional and financial consequences of lawfare because I've been involved in it now for about 3 years. These are considerable consequences. They are not to be undertaken lightly, and this is not the weapon of choice for everyone. But I do think it's a mistake to back away from this fight. The disclosure I got under my data subject access request showed me exactly what Eventbrite thinks of women who say that you cannot change sex. And remember, Eventbrite could be any one of these American companies, any one of them. They are all exactly the same. So Eventbrite is just a cipher, as far as I can see, for all of big tech. Eventbrite didn't care if I was allied with the right wing or allied with the left wing. Didn't care if I'd read any academic feminist theory. It tarred everybody with the same brush. They sent me a redacted email. I assume that they were talking about WP UK in that email because it was around the time that they pulled those events. And they said, well, we think the people organising this event are a bit more buttoned up than Sarah Phillimore. Fair comment. I'm sure most people are more buttoned up than me. But that the events were essentially the same in that they both promoted trans denialism / exclusion. So this is the problem for all of us. It really doesn't matter where our allegiances are. The moment you demonstrate less than 100% compliance with the idea that a man can become a woman anytime he feels like it on his simple assertion, you will be swept into the dustbin of hateful, violent, dangerous content by these companies. So this, I think, is the beating heart of what is going so very wrong. It doesn't matter how prettily we dress it up, or if we're talking about compassion for trans people. If you think biological sex is real, then you are going to be denied goods and services by companies which are effective monopolies in really important areas. I mean, look what happened to the Free Speech Union and PayPal. I mean, happily that was reversed. But these American companies control really significant services. What is the alternative to Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn or PayPal? There's not really real competition. They're monoliths. And if you find yourself excluded from these services, that could be at an enormous cost to the individual. So this is a breach, I say, of not just my right not to be discriminated against, it's a breach of my Article 10 rights protected against by the European Convention. And another reason I'm really upset about these decisions is that they form a vicious cycle of legitimization for yet more discrimination. I was really shocked about a couple of weeks before the event to get a telephone call from the Chief Executive Officer of the Conway Hall itself. That was the venue for our event. He didn't want to cancel it, but he told me he'd been getting a lot of complaints and he didn't want me to mention the venue on social media. So I complied with a heavy heart. I was very grateful that the Conway Hall did not pull the event, because then I would have had to have sued them as well. And I didn't want to do that. They have a proud history. And I know have hosted very many events which are supportive of women and women's rights. But it was clear that Conway Hall were being beaten with this stick, that if Eventbrite thinks it's so awful, why the hell are you allowing it to go ahead? So for all these reasons, we have to fight this. It's really important. This is not just me having a spat. This has implications for everybody who finds themselves outside the community standards of these private companies. So I think this involves really big and serious questions that transcend political or ideological affiliations. If you agree with me, please do consider supporting my action. I know money is really tight for everyone right now. So if you don't want to donate, you can't afford to, or you don't approve of lawfare, then please just talk to people about what I've told you this afternoon. I think it's so important. As I end, I'm going to share with you one review of the Transpositions book on Amazon. Now you can go and download the book. Hopefully it will work on your Kindle. There's a few problems with the PDF for £3. So you can make up your own mind about this. I don't accept for one moment that the men and women who shared their stories with me and Al are hateful or part of a cult. But this particular person who provided this review is a very clear example of the kind of man that Eventbrite and all the other companies are empowering and enabling. And this is what he said. This book works as a great catalogue of a time when certain people took leave of their critical faculties and decided that a small, marginal section of society were to blame for the problems of a traumatized generation in an increasingly insecure era. It works as a study in the pathology of hate and how easy it can be to manufacture tensions and manipulate frightened people into cult-like behaviors. I recommend this to any student of sociology and/or psychology. Sarah Phillimore has accidentally compiled her own body of evidence against herself and those she has exploited for this dossier of paranoid fantasies. They are right to remain anonymous. See, what these men are not without intelligence. And what they've done is they've learned and they've parroted the language of the oppressed. And they have so very cleverly insinuated themselves into almost every organization, public and private, with this story of being the most oppressed. It's been very cleverly done. I have to hand it to them. What we're dealing with is an ideology of gender identity that defies reality and rationality, and which fundamentally at its core really hates women. So I think it's vital that we're able to put aside our political differences, dial down on expectations of purity, and fight this before it really is too late. If Maya hadn't stood the course, would we be able to talk freely now? I have my doubts. So thank you very much for listening. If you can afford a £5, I would be very grateful. If you can't, please just talk, disseminate, discuss. And this will happen to other people. And so be ready. And as I said, I will put the text of this talk and a number of links to my crowdfunder, some articles and some case law on my Substack on Sunday night. So if anything I've said has piqued your interest and you want to know more, then you can have a read of that. But thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for listening.
Is Fair Cop doing many actions at the moment, or are they things on a back burner? Because they were very active, or you have been very active with Fair Cop.
I think the most recent big case was Darren Brady. That was a very interesting case where both he and Harry were unlawfully arrested, and that all fizzled out because the police didn't pursue it. We're still waiting, however, for the revised guidance on hate crime. Still, even though Harry won his action in December 2021. So yeah, things are a little bit on the back burner because the College of Policing are just dodging the issue by not revising the guidance. So we're all in limbo. What are we allowed to say? And this is, I mean, the case of Posey Parker, Kelly J. Keane being arrested over the Brighton event is huge. So I really, it's going to be so interesting to see what happens next. And I hope Fair Cop can do whatever it can to help. I mean, we need to see what she's been charged with for a start. But if it's anything like what was recorded against me, I'll just share with you my favourite thing on the 12 pages of police tweets was a picture of my dog looking cute. And above it, I'd said, my dog would call me a Nazi for cheese. That was recorded on a police database as hatred towards a transgender individual. I am not joking. This is the absurdity, the stupidity, the terrifying risibility of all of this. And it is terrifying because Kelly J. Keane's being told you either submit to an interview or you're coming in handcuffs. For what? For saying that women don't have penises? Well, I'm hoping to be outside Trowbridge police station with a bloody big banner, and let's see if they arrest us. Apparently they haven't got any cells at Trowbridge. They've got a couple in Melksham. So if we get 20 women to turn up and get arrested, they've got a problem. I mean, I'm laughing because it is on one level so funny, but on another it's not. You know, we could all end up in the cells for saying women don't have penises and transition of children is abuse, which I will stand by and I will say in public until I die, because it's true.